All right, everybody. Well, since it's 7 o'clock and we like to start on time, I would like to welcome you to this evening's program, Irish Cookery. We're going to talk about some new and fun recipes coming out of Ireland with Kristyn Slick of makingmealtimememories.com. As you know, we've had Kristyn before. We really like her program, so we're going to have her back a bunch of times more after this and a bunch of times more before this, of course. Before we get started, I am going to remind you of the things I remind you of every time that we're together. The closed captioning is enabled. If you look at your screen, you can tap or click on the closed captioning symbol. And that is where you can enable or disable or look at your options and change things. I would like to talk about some things that are coming up that I think are very exciting. First, we have on Wednesday, March 29th at 7 p.m. here on Zoom, we've invited back Dr. Ribby Sali, who is a professor at both Harper College and Roosevelt University. He is an expert in foreign policy, and he will be talking about the war in Ukraine, which I know is not the most fun thing to talk about, but it is something that is still happening and still has a lot to talk about, just in terms of what could happen, what has happened, and what Dr. Sully thinks will happen. So sign up for that, March 29th, 7 p.m. On Zoom. There will be a recording for that. So if you sign up and miss it, I'll send you the YouTube link, just like I will with this program afterwards. The second thing I want to talk to you about, we are inviting back another great presenter of ours, Leslie Goddard. She is debuting a new presentation called Pan Am Betty, all about the golden years of air travel. And that is going to be a hybrid program hosted here on the second floor in the Rasmussen Room, 7 p.m. on Monday, April 3rd. So once again, for hybrid, you sign up. You have the option of being there in person or virtually. If you only see the virtual option, that means we have run out of physical chairs for people to sit in the room, and you're invited to watch from home. Everybody is going to get a Zoom link. So whether or not you're virtual, you have the option to watch it virtually. And there will be a recording offered for a brief amount of time, which again, we'll send to you after the program is over. This and all of our programs can be found on our website at schaumburglibrary.org, and you can talk to our lovely people at the information desk. They can sign you up for whatever you need, or you can talk to me. I'll put my email in the chat if you wish. And I'll be happy to take your comments, compliments, and everything else. So moving on from that, I'm going to introduce the main event. We are welcoming her back, home chef, teacher, and purveyor of fine things to eat, Kristyn Slick.
Thanks so much, Nat. I'm so excited to be back with you guys today. I'm Kristyn Slick of Classroom Kitchen, and tonight we're talking about Irish cookery. I know it seems like we're a little bit late past St. Patrick's Day, but you might have leftovers, or you might not have gotten a chance to cook corned beef yet. So today we're going to talk about a couple of recipes that are going to be good for leftover corned beef, and just a great Irish apple cake that is good any time of the year. I actually just made our corned beef on Monday. We were traveling for St. Patrick's Day. My son is a hockey player, and he was playing a tournament out of Notre Dame. I mean, St. Patrick's Day weekend, Notre Dame, kind of amazing. So we didn't get home until Sunday evening, and so Monday nights I made our corned beef. I did find a restaurant with a Reuben on St. Patrick's Day, so I did enjoy that, but I still made our traditional corned beef and cabbage on Monday night and thoroughly enjoyed that. So tonight we're going to be making two recipes: corned beef and cabbage grilled cheese and an Irish apple cake. We also, as I was telling Matt before everyone logged on, I have an extensive amount of great cultural food history for you about Irish cooking. There is so many misconceptions about Irish cooking and how bland it might be, but it's actually just very great home style cooking. There isn't a lot of fuss within the recipes, but that doesn't mean they're not good. So we're going to really dive into the history of some Irish cookery as well. If you guys have anything you have questions about during the presentation tonight, feel free to throw them in the chat. I love interacting with you guys during the program. It makes it that much more entertaining for everyone out in the audience, plus myself. And sometimes we end up with some really good conversations. I would ask if you have like more general cooking questions that don't have to necessarily do with the recipes. Excuse me. I'm also a teacher by day. I teach junior high, and it's the week before spring break. So my voice is about shot because wrangling 30 children at a time who are sixth graders and excited for spring break is no easy feat, let me tell you. It's been a rough week. Anyway, if you have more general cooking questions, please save those for the end. I'd be happy to answer those. But if you do have a specific question about any of the history I'm presenting or any of the recipes we're talking about, feel free to throw them in there. I'm happy to talk through those with you guys, okay? So outside of Ireland, like I said, Irish food is often mistakenly thought to just consist of nothing but like potatoes and meat. But this could not be more wrong. The food and cooking of Ireland are actually steeped in history and heritage. And Irish food draws on a wealth of ingredients that are available. And Ireland is situated in a very unique location in the sense that they have wonderful seafood, wonderful food from, the land. They have moors, they have pasture land. It's just a gorgeous area, and they have a plethora of resources available to them. Home and family also play a very large part in Irish food cooking and in the kitchen. And the kitchen is really the heart of every home, and with Irish hospitality and their love of celebrating, really renowned throughout the world. That's why there's just these grand celebrations for St. Patrick's Day. And we're still continuing the week after, right? So where does like Irish food come from? So countless influences have made their mark on Irish cooking. Specifically, the Celts arrived in Ireland 600 to 500 BC. And then the Vikings and the English had some colonization in the 16th and 17th centuries. So there's kind of a mesh of different cultures that really create the Irish cooking and Irish food heritage. Cattle has also played a large role in Irish food from the Middle Ages. And then we have the potato with the arrival of the potato in the 16th century. Meat was predominantly food for the rich, with the poor having to make do with basically the meat leftovers, oftentimes being the internal organs. They also were heavy in their diet with milk, cheese, and butter, which really helped to supplement their grains and barley for nourishment, okay? Now, if you notice, the recipes I picked tonight did not really include a potato. Really, a lot of the potato recipes I was finding when I was researching this program for us were pretty long cook kind of recipes, or they were kind of boring, to be honest, without kind of overdoing the potato. I found tater tot recipes, and I found spins on different kinds of mashed potatoes and things like that. But I really didn't feel like it drew on what just a traditional Irish potato was. So I did decide not to do a recipe with potatoes. However, I did decide to do corned beef and cabbage. So we are going to talk about that really quick because I do want to start with that recipe here tonight before we start our apple cake. Okay. Now, funny enough, corned beef and cabbage isn't actually a national dish of Ireland. Okay. You would not find people eating it on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland. It's typically eaten around the holiday only here in the US. So how did this make its transfer? Okay. So how did it become synonymous with St. Patrick's Day and the Irish? Well, during the time of the Irish immigration in the US, the first generation of Irish Americans were in search of some comforting tastes from home. On St. Patty's Day, that actually meant something that they would eat, boiled bacon, okay, not corned beef. But the immigrants at that time were too poor to afford the high price of pork and bacon products. So instead, at the time, they turned to the cheapest cut of meat, which was beef brisket. Now, that's not the case today, right? Well, everything's expensive today. Given that New York City was a melting pot for immigrants from around the world, rather than boil the beef, they actually adapted a cooking method from another culture. Brining was actually a cooking method from Eastern Europeans. And so they actually decided to brine their meat and salt cure it. And where did corn come from? So corned beef, okay? And it actually has nothing to do with the actual vegetable corn, but it refers to the corn-sized salt crystals during the brining process. Sometimes corned beef is even referred to as pickled beef, because you are quite literally pickling brisket with this type of brining process. So the corned beef paired with cabbage, which was one of the cheapest available vegetables at the time, created our tradition of corned beef and cabbage. So it's actually not something that is rooted in Ireland, but with what they could make do in a new life in the US. Did see a question pop up, so I'm going to pause for a second. All right. It says, how many people are attending tonight? Right now, I have 36 people on, which is super exciting. So, but that might be multiple people within each viewing area. So I'm not totally sure, but right now we have 36 people on. So that's exciting. And then Matt is throwing in our recipes into the chat as well. So feel free to look in the chat for those recipes if you did not get them via email. Okay. So for our corned beef and cabbage grilled cheese, this is a really great way to either use your leftover corned beef, or you can get your corned beef from the deli. I always forget that you can get sliced corned beef from the deli. I'm typically a turkey and salami kind of household. That's what my kids like to eat. That's what I like to eat. And so I don't typically go out of my way to buy corned beef unless it's kind of around St. Patrick's Day. But I always forget when I make this recipe that this is what we want for this kind of grilled cheese. You want or you can of course use your leftover, but it is going to be a thinly sliced, or you're going to want to try to shred it. Okay. Because you don't want it super thick. You want it kind of more melt as you're eating the sandwich. Let's see. Denise says there are two types of cuts in the store. Which corned beef is better? So I like to use the flat cut. It's less fatty. And I feel like it slices a little bit better. I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but my parents typically make the other cut, which is fattier. I typically like the flat cut though. Oh, I think it's called a point cut, maybe off the top of my head. I don't typically buy it. So I typically go for the flat cut, less fatty, and it slices really nicely. The other one, again, like I said, is fattier. It's going to be more flavorful because it's fattier, but sometimes you end up with a little less meat because you're kind of paying for the fat on it, right? So it's really either one. They're both great. I thoroughly enjoy when my parents cook it, and then I enjoy when I make it at home too. So it really depends on what kind of overall flavor you're going for. It's maybe a little richer if you go with the fattier one. Okay. Again, flat cut for me. All right, so I already started prepping this one a little bit, specifically because it involves an onion. And I know every time I teach a cooking class, I cry live on camera with an onion. So I went ahead and sliced that onion for us. So I have in my back pot over here, I have a tablespoon of butter and a small onion thinly sliced. So let me go ahead and grab that. So I did just melt the butter a little bit, and then just one small onion thinly sliced. So this is we're making literally enough for like maybe 2 sandwiches. Okay. So if you wanted to make this for a larger crowd, you could of course double, triple, quadruple this recipe without a problem. But like I said, we're just making enough just for about 2 sandwiches with this recipe. A small onion thinly sliced. We're also going to add in some salt, pepper, and some sugar because we really want these onions to caramelize and cook down and get really sweet. Their flavor profile is going to completely change, going from like this spicy, crying kind of onion to a sweet, mellow onion for our grilled cheese. Okay. And this is going to be the quote unquote cabbage. Okay. So we're not actually using cabbage for our grilled cheese. We're using actually a simmered, beautiful onion. We're also going to be adding some Guinness beer. We're going to be adding a little bit of Worcestershire sauce and creating our grilled cheese out of that. These are going to cook down for about 10 minutes with butter, onion, sugar, salt, and pepper. Once they're cooked down and starting to caramelize, then we're going to add in our beer and our Worcestershire sauce, and we're going to continue cooking it for like another 10 minutes. So that's why I have the apple cake that we're going to make next, so that we don't have to sit here and watch this pot boil for 20 minutes. Okay. And once that is all simmered down, we'll add our corned beef and then we'll build our grilled cheese. Okay. So let me get this on the stovetop, and I have to add some sugar to it as well. And we'll talk a little bit more food history too, as we are going with our Irish apple cake. Okay. So we're going to do just a tablespoon of sugar. And we're going to let this cook down over like a medium heat. You don't want it too scorching. You don't want to burn your onions. And then I do have to add a little bit of salt and pepper as well. All right, so we got that going over medium heat. All right, just checking the chat and the Q&A. Fabulous. All right, perfect. Okay, so that's kind of the history about the corned beef and cabbage. And so as we're making our apple cake, I will also talk to you a little bit about the potato in Ireland and the effect there. We're going to talk a little bit about the fish and seafood. We're going to talk a little bit about the Irish cheese that we can get there as well. So lots of really good food history still coming your way. All right, so for our apple cake. Now, this apple cake is a traditional dessert in Ireland, and it's really a no-fuss cake, okay? It's not very difficult to make. It is typically a recipe that is passed from generation to generation. So a lot of recipes are just slightly different. It's also traditionally usually created or baked in a cast iron pan. Because the original Irish apple cake actually were steamed in pots over an open fire. Okay, so sometimes you get those nice crispy edges around the sides, and just this nice caramelization in it as well from the hot cast iron. Okay, originally too, Irish apple cakes are made from crab apples, which are really plentiful in Ireland. They're in abundant supply. My good replacement is a Granny Smith apple. We want it nice and tart. Because the cake is pretty sweet. We are making a streusel for it as well. So the tartness of the apple will really help cut through some of that sweetness, and it'll also help mellow out some of the tartness of the apple. My recipe says to use 3 Granny Smith apples. However, my grocery shopper picked me 3 ginormous Granny Smith apples. I probably will only use about 1.5 of these. Okay, so if you're like buying them like the like a la carte, I should say, like 1 apple at a time and not in a bag of apples, you're probably only going to need like 1.5 or 2 apples. If you're buying them like in bulk, like in a bigger bag, you probably will use 3 or 4. Okay, because they're usually smaller. But I have 3 really giant apples. I'm probably only going to try to get through 1.5 or so of them. Okay. Now the Irish apple cake, like I said, is no fuss. Okay, and there are some. I keep looking down because my 6-month-old puppy is sleeping on my feet right now, and she's never this chill, so I'm not going to move her, but I also don't want to step on her tail. So she's chilling right now, which is nice for once, right? So an Irish apple cake is very moist and tender. And like I said, it's a simple recipe. I didn't do any kind of variation on it like I did with the corned beef and cabbage because I wanted to show you the traditional way. There are other ways that you can dial it up with different nuts or, creating a cheesecake out of it or creating cupcakes or quick breads or like things like that. But I just was going straight up classic Irish apple cake. Okay. Like I said, too, these are often passed from generation to generation. Considering a lot of Ireland are farming families, is with mothers passing the recipes to daughters. It's just a really cool history there. Now, like I said, too, with the apples are important as well. They do play a significant role in Irish and Celtic mythology. The legendary Avalon, the location where King Arthur was taken to recover from his wounds after fighting the Mordred of the Battle of Camlann, is considered a sacred isle of the apple trees. So I know that was kind of a mouthful, but basically King Arthur was healed on the Isle of the Apple Trees. So apples are oftentimes a prominent feature in a lot of Irish desserts, okay? Thus the traditional Irish apple cake, okay? So that's kind of the history of this recipe. I am gonna make it in a traditional cake pan. It is a 9-inch cake pan here. I could use cast iron, but I wanted to make sure that this was accessible to everybody. So this turns out beautifully still. I made one last week and we ate through it before we even left for Notre Dame. So it's a delicious cake. You can serve it with powdered sugar. That's how it's traditionally served, is with powdered sugar. You can also serve it with ice cream or whipped cream, but that's definitely more of like an Americanized thing, adding more sugar on top of it. But the powdered sugar is just enough sweetness to really just pull the dessert together. This dessert also does take a little bit to bake. It usually takes about 45 to 60 minutes. Okay. So just make sure that you give yourself enough time. It is a pretty dense cake with a nice hefty streusel topping on there. So we want to make sure we give ourselves enough time for that. Okay. So the first thing we're going to make is our streusel topping, and we're going to do our streusel topping by hand. So let me tilt you down here on the camera. And I already started mixing some of our ingredients here. Again, just kind of prepping a couple of things that I could for us. In here, I have 3/4 of a cup of flour, 1/4 cup of old-fashioned oats, and a 1/2 cup of sugar. Okay, and we're just going to I actually need to add a little bit of salt too. We're just going to whisk this together, stir it together, get it nicely incorporated here. This is going to make a really nice crunchy streusel topping. Going to do a pinch of salt as well, just to cut through the sweetness, a little bit of that sugar, help mellow that out a little bit. I'm going to give my onions a stir. I can really smell them cooking along. So I want to make sure I give those a stir. They're not sitting too hot in the butter or caramelizing yet. We really want to sweat them out first before they start caramelizing. So we're really going to wilt them down, make them nice and soft. Once they're nice and soft, we'll let the sugar start doing the work and caramelizing those onions. Okay, now to this, to make it a streusel topping, what we're going to want to add is 6 tablespoons of cold butter. Okay, so I cut them into 1 tablespoon kind of measures, and we're going to go in with our hands. Okay, so again, can you picture this in a farmhouse? Just, you know, mom and daughter whipping this up in the kitchen. And all we're going to do here is use our fingers to smash the butter into the flour, the oats, the sugar, and the salt. Okay, and this is going to go on the top of the cake. It's going to get nice and browned, add a nice crunch layer to a really nice, moist, tender cake as it is. And the powdered sugar will fit in nicely with this as well. Now we're going to keep going with this streusel topping until it's kind of like a coarse breadcrumb. Okay, so we don't want huge, huge chunks of butter. We want the butter to really be crumbled up and touching really all of the dry ingredients. That way you don't end up eating like clumps of flour because the butter just melts in one spot. So we're going to keep going with this, just using the warmth of our hands to crumble it up. You could also too, if you have a pastry blender, you could absolutely use a pastry blender. I would not recommend a mixer. The mixer is going to cream your butter even if it's cold. So you don't want to do that. I also wouldn't recommend a food processor because the food processor will chop up your oats, and we don't want those oats chopped up. Okay, we want them to remain nice and large. So your hands or a pastry blender are going to be your best option. Now, after we put this all together, we do want the butter to remain cold until it's ready to go on top of our cake. So we're going to put this in the refrigerator so the butter can to like actually cool down again, because we actually warmed it all up with our hands. And so we want this to get cold again. That's again another trick to make a great streusel topping. All right, we're almost there, almost to a coarse breadcrumb. I got a couple more large pats of butter that I'm kind of weeding out here. And once you learn a cooking technique like this, it's really fun to add this to muffins or quick breads or additional cakes. Streusels are just a really yummy way to add another layer to a cake or a quick bread or a muffin. Okay. All right, so I think we're about there, guys. So we're kind of at like a coarse breadcrumb here. Not really any huge large pats of butter. Everything is really incorporated pretty nicely. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this in the refrigerator. I'm gonna wash my hands because I have definitely some butter hands right now. And then we will start actually making the batter for we'll peel our apples and make our batter for our apple cake. And I'll tell you a little bit more history about some Irish cooking. Just give me 1 second. Get this all off of my hands. I'm not as talented as like the Food Network people who literally just wipe it on their apron and move on, or a towel and move on. I don't know if I'm just more like sensitive to the feel of it, or I don't know. They probably got TV magic going on with that too. We're live here and definitely home cook style. All right. Sorry, puppy. Just poked her head. All right. I did see something pop up, so I'll make sure I go to that chat. Will quick oats work, or does it have to be old fashioned? Quick oats are fine too. We just don't want them blended down. And we don't want like oatmeal packets. So you do want something that is like, doesn't have extra sugar or anything in it. Okay. So you do want something that's just purely oats, not any of like the oatmeal packets or anything like that. Kathleen, can you use 2 table knives to cut across the butter into flour? Yeah, you absolutely can use 2 butter knives because, let me see if I can find it. My daughter actually is the bigger baker than I am. She's 13 and she has her own little micro bakery. She makes scones and she uses a pastry blender to make scones because she cuts her butter in. So a pastry blender actually looks like butter knives. Okay, so it's literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 butter knives, and you rock it in your dough or in your streusel or in your dough or whatever you're cutting your butter into. So yeah, 2 knives would work great. You might have to get there in the very end to kind of really get it mealy, but this will really do a quick work of it. Again, not everyone has one of these. So again, I just wanted to use some of the best tools that we have available, which are our hands. So yes, 2 butter knives would absolutely work as well. All right, I think we're good otherwise. Okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna peel some apples and I'm just gonna do like 2 of them and get those going here for us. So a little bit about the Irish potato. Since we aren't actually cooking with potatoes tonight, I did still want to tell you a little bit about it. Everyone typically knows about the Irish potato famine, but they also didn't know that the potatoes didn't arrive in Ireland until about the mid to late 16th century. It was a relatively new crop for the people of Ireland, but the damp, cool Irish climate and soil conditions proved perfect for potatoes. And so really the potato moved from a really simple garden vegetable to a staple food crop for both man and animals. It was super cheap to grow, and even a small plot could really produce a hardy crop. The high mineral and vitamin content of the potato as well was also, it was a perfect cheap food for the poor of Ireland. And it was really a welcome change to those cereal crops I was telling you about before, the grains and barley that they had relied on for nourishment. This apple's ready too. However, the dependence on the potatoes as a staple food also really proved to be a curse for the Irish with the potato famine in Ireland. Now, the first potato famine in Ireland happened in 1739, and this was a result of cold weather. But the potato famine, the larger one that a lot of us know about that actually provided the US with a lot of Irish immigrants, was between 1845 and 1849. Now, this one was caused by the potato blight. Now, this is a rapidly spreading disease that wiped out potato crops and resulted in the death of over 1 million Irish people. Of those who did survive the potato famine, 1845 to 1849, over 2 million of them ended up emigrating to the US and the UK. And several million Irish people, several million were left in Ireland destitute. Okay, so just really hard, down hard on their luck, very malnourished, and very poor. Now, potatoes still remain a pretty basic foodstuffs in Ireland, and they're served almost daily with their meals. Unlike Britain, though, potatoes are often served in their skin, and they're actually removed at the table. And this actually ensures that more nutrients remain in the potato during cooking. The potato skin also holds a lot of vitamins. So if you're not one that eats the potato skin of your baked potato, that's definitely where you're going to find a lot of your vitamins. So they are served with skins on until they are served at the table, at which point they are usually removed. Now, the potatoes are also a part of a famous recipe called colcannon. Now, colcannon is boiled potatoes mashed up with cabbage or kale, and then mixed with onions or butter or cream, or onions and butter or cream. And this is definitely originated in Ireland. According to the Oxford Companion to Food, the word colcannon comes from a Gaelic word meaning white-headed cabbage. And the cannon part of the name is translated pretty much as like garlic or onion or leek. And this recipe first appeared in print in the late 1700s. So that coal cannon is definitely a very popular meal. Again, very simple. I'm picturing, again, a farmhouse with just some very staple ingredients and great resources at their fingertips. And they're creating these very, very good meals for their family. Now, Irish hospitality and generous portions of food are all common in Ireland and at Irish restaurants. Typically, people of Ireland eat a very large breakfast. Now, that's not as common today because people have picked up kind of more a fast-paced lifestyle, but still a lot of rural people in Ireland will start their day with a pretty hearty breakfast with soda bread and pancakes and porridge and eggs and various meat products. They also will have a mixed grill of breakfast meats, black pudding scones, so a pretty wide variety of things for breakfast. Now, dinner is their main meal of the day. It's usually eaten at lunchtime. A typical dish is Dublin Coddle, which is bacon, sausage, potato, and onion soup. Today, however, many Irish people do eat lighter meals during lunchtime and save their heavier meal for later in the day when they're home from school or work. A typical supper in a rural Irish home is typically a slice of bread with butter and a glass of milk. But like I said, that's only if they eat their larger lunch. So there definitely is a really great emphasis on food and family and eating to work, right? So lots of really good values there in Irish homes, especially in rural Ireland as well, with the city becoming a little bit more fast-paced, okay? So we have all our apples done. This is gonna be more than enough for our cake, especially because we're only doing a 9-inch cake pan. So if I were doing this with a cast iron, I'd probably use about a 10-inch cast iron pan. Okay, so just a little bit larger. Cake won't be as high, a little bit thinner, but again, the taste is still going to be there. Let me check these onions. They are caramelized here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add our Guinness beer. Okay, so it's just a nice dark beer. Some Worcestershire as well. So about 3/4 cup of beer, and we're going to let this get nice and syrupy. So this is going to cook down for about another 8 or so minutes. All right, a couple dashes of Worcestershire sauce as well. Nice peppery flavor. And we'll let those onions cook down, continue to boil down in that nice, rich beer. Perfect. All right. Any questions or comments or anything as we go along? I know I talk a little fast sometimes. I just want to make sure I get all the information to you within our hour-long program. Okay, so if you do, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. I'm going to actually grab some parchment paper. I'm going to show you a really fun trick that I like to use for my cake pans. Okay, I actually like to use parchment paper when I bake because it's one less pan that I have to clean. It also makes it non-stick without having to use excess butter or fat to oil the pan. So I'm going to go ahead and take some parchment paper here. And I'm going to rip it larger than my cake pan. Okay, so it is going to be larger than it. And I'm going to show you a way to actually measure to cut for a circular cake pan. And this is one of my favorite tricks that I learned about a year ago. And I'm super thankful I did because it saved me some hand washing. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold our parchment paper into 4s. And then we're going to fold it into like a triangle. Okay, so it's like right now we're like in a diamond shape, a kite. And we're going to fold it up into a triangle. Oh, so smells so good in here between those onions and that sugar and that beer. Oh, so delicious. And then we're just going to keep folding it until we have a nice narrow, like almost like a paper airplane, right? Okay, so now I have nice and folded. Okay, this is absolutely going to be too large for our cake pan. So what I'm going to do is take my cake pan over and I'm going to take the tip of the parchment paper from the middle of the cake pan and I'm actually going to cut slightly inside the diameter. No, not diameter. What am I saying? This is diameter. I'm not a math teacher, guys. I'm a language arts and social studies teacher. Radius. Radius, yes. So we're going to cut slightly inside of that so that we're left with a little teeny tiny triangle. Now when we open it up, it's going to be a fun little circle. And guess what fits perfectly in the bottom of our cake pan? Ta-da! Isn't that the best trick? I love that trick. Makes me happy. All right, so our cake pan now has parchment paper in the bottom of it. You can still spray the parchment paper if you want to, but honestly, for this recipe, I haven't felt the need to have to do that, okay? So this is perfect. So we'll move the cake pan to the side here. We're gonna start to make our batter. Now, our batter, we do need to cream some butter and sugar together. Let me move some of these ingredients here. And I can't just disturb the sleeping princess under my feet here. Ugh. All right. Okay, so we have some room temperature butter that we're going to cream in our mixer. Okay, some room temperature butter that we're going to cream in our mixer. This is different than softened butter, guys. Softened butter is going to be a lot softer. We still want it to have a little bit of firmness to it. Okay, so that is different. If it does say it's softened, that is going to be something that you're going to set out for a long while, or you're actually going to use the help of the microwave. If it's something that says room temperature, that's something you set out for maybe about 30 minutes to, again, come to room temperature, but still have some softness, some firmness to it. We're also going to do a half a cup of sugar, and then we're going to cream this together, okay, until it's nice and light and fluffy. So we're going to let our mixer go here. While that's mixing, we're going to go ahead and put our dry ingredients into a separate bowl. We do want to whisk these together separately. No need to actually like sift the flour or anything like that. It is a pretty hearty cake. It's, again, a lot of no fuss. We're going to do 1 1/4 cup of flour. I like to measure my flour into my measuring cup with a spoon. This is the best way to measure if you're not measuring in grams, because then you don't end up with packed measuring cups, okay, which then oftentimes leads to too much flour in your recipe. So I like to, again, spoon my stuff into a measuring cup. And 1/4 cup here too. My butter is almost done being whipped up. We're also going to do some baking powder. Just a teaspoon of this. All right, let's turn that off. Nice and creamed together. Teaspoon of that and some cinnamon. So the cinnamon is about a teaspoon. Just makes it kind of nice and warm. If you like more cinnamon, you absolutely can add more cinnamon. But I like just a teaspoon, especially at this time of year, like springtime. I don't want too heavy of a warm spice. I would rather something a little bit lighter and brighter, especially now that it's springtime. So oftentimes I just do the teaspoon, but if it's fall and I'm making this, you better bet that I'm adding some additional cinnamon to it, sometimes even some nuts. All right, and then also we're gonna do a little bit of salt, just 1/8 of a teaspoon. That's a pretty typical measurement for any kind of baked good. Okay, let me get in here with my scraper, make sure all my butter is down off the sides. Before we add in our dry ingredients, we are gonna whisk in our vanilla and our eggs, and then we will mix in the dry ingredients. Real quick on our beer, still pretty liquidy, not quite that syrupy yet, so I'm gonna let it go a little bit longer. Don't worry, I'll show you the picture, camera view of it soon. We're gonna add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. So we're gonna go heavy on the vanilla extract, especially for a pretty small cake in relation to regular cake recipes. And then we're gonna do 2 eggs. The eggs I also like to use at room temperature, mostly because they mix in better, not because it really changes too much, but I do feel like it's a better mix if you do use a room temperature egg. So I'm going to use 2 room temperature eggs for this recipe. Perfect. We'll let that mix together. I'll clean that up in a little bit. All right, while that's mixing, I'm going to take my whisk here and I'm going to whisk together my dry ingredients. And that's just so those are well incorporated before we start adding them into our wet mixture here. We don't end up with clumps of flour. We don't end up with uneven baking powder or baking soda, or sorry, baking powder or cinnamon, okay? All right, we have a really nice wet batter over here. So now I'm gonna turn down the mixer and we're gonna add in our dry ingredients. And we're gonna mix until they just come together. It's gonna be a really thick batter. Let me bring you a little closer here so you can see how thick this is. All right, it's a pretty thick batter. It actually almost looks more like cookie dough at this point, but we are gonna add a little bit of milk to this to help create more of a smoother cake batter for us before we transfer it to our pan. So about 3 tablespoons of milk, cream, half and half, that's all fine. I like using fattier stuff because I think it tastes better and richer, but that's totally your preference. So now it's looking more like almost like a quick bread batter. It's still pretty thick, but definitely not like a cookie dough. Okay. So there's our batter here for our Irish apple cake. Now for this, we're just going to take it and transfer it to a cake pan. Oh, my stomach is like growling looking at this because I know how good it tastes. Like I said, I think we ate through the apple cake in like 2 nights. It was like half done in one night and half gone the next. And my family was very excited to hear that I was making this again tonight. All right, get this into our pan. Now, if you do use parchment paper, it is going to be a little bit wonky, like spreading it because it is a pretty thick cake. But as long as you kind of hold down one edge of the parchment paper, it will spread out. But it is pretty thick, almost muffiny. Ugh, so badly want to lick my fingers as I put this in here. And then we're going to put our apples right on top of this in a fanned out kind of pattern. We're going to try not to overlap the apples too much. We do have them pretty thin. They probably are about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch thick as I cut them. Nothing too precise. Again, this is kind of more of a rustic recipe, not too fussy, but it comes together beautifully. And it's going to look like you've put a lot of fuss into it. All right. This will spread as it bakes down, as that butter melts down in the pan. So getting it all the way to the edges isn't too much of my concern. I'm going to turn my onions off back here so that way they don't over caramelize and burn. Okay, so I'm going to show that to you here soon. I'm also going to get my streusel out of my fridge. All right, so for the apple slices, we're just going to try to go around. I'm overlapping only ever so slightly, just so that we don't really have any gaps, right? But I really don't want to make layers and layers of apples because we do want to have these kind of cook down and be soft in the cake. We don't want them to be super crunchy. And I probably will go in and stick a couple more, kind of feather them in a little bit. So we'll kind of feather them into each other. Oop, I don't like to go in that way. Now this cake will not be done cooking by the time our class is over. So if you'd like to follow me for an update of what this cake looks like when we're all said and done, you can go to my Facebook page, which is called Classroom Kitchen. And I always post the finished products there, the finished recipes, and tag your library so that everyone knows what kind of amazing program you got to be a part of here tonight. I'd love if you could comment on that, tell me how you liked the class. You know, if you make this recipe yourself, I'd love to hear that as well. Okay, so we have a really pretty cake here. We're kind of, like I said, feathered those in, but they're not super layered on here, okay? Now we're gonna add the streusel. The streusel is going to feel like a lot, okay? But remember, it's kind of bulky now because it has lots of clumps of butter in it, 6 tablespoons. So this whole recipe has about almost 2 sticks of butter in it. So it's, like I said, dense and rich and just delicious. Very, very satisfying kind of cake. And then this is going to go in the oven at 350 degrees for about an hour. So I would start checking it around like the 45-minute mark because all oven temps are a little bit different, just to see how the doneness is. But usually when I do this, it's about an hour that it takes to do this. All right, there we go. Okay, and again, if you'd like to go to my Facebook page, Classroom Kitchen, you can follow me, and later tonight, once this cake is out of the oven, I will post some finished pictures of what we ended up creating in our live class tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this in the oven. And then we are going to head to the back stove top and finish up our grilled cheese. I'll set my timer here so I don't forget that it's in the oven before I go to bed tonight. I am not a night person, so definitely early to bed, early to rise kind of girl. All right. So let's go back to the stovetop. We're going to actually be taking our corned beef, our sliced deli corned beef, and we're going to be adding it to our onion mixture. Okay, let me double check the chat, see what you guys are doing. Sandy, I love your sparkly countertop. Thank you. I do too. It's actually that Korean, and I love it because this is actually my studio kitchen in my basement. So I wanted as much like light reflecting off of it as possible because obviously we're in the basement. So this is definitely a fun thing to have. Carrie says yum, and then Sadhana asked if I use gala apples instead. Will that be okay? Absolutely. You might not. It might be gala apples aren't as I would say as hearty as like Granny Smith apples. Granny Smith apples hold more of a little bit of a crunch to them. So they might melt down a little bit more. And it might be a little sweeter of a cake rather than because that tartness of the Granny apples helps mellow some of that sugar out. But it's absolutely, you can use kind of whatever apples you want. I just like the Granny Smith. It most closely resembles what like a crab apple would be in Ireland. So I just tried to go as close as I could. Okay. Any other questions before we move to the back? All right, if you do, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I'm happy to answer them. So our corned beef is going to go into our onion, beer, sugar, Worcestershire sauce mixture. Now, when you do this, you want to make sure that your temperature is off. Okay, so we're just kind of warming the corned beef in the mixture and kind of really letting it soak in. And if you didn't know this, being from Chicago, when you make a traditional Italian beef sandwich, that's the same thing you do. A lot of people boil their beef, their sliced beef in the au jus, and that is a no-go. You're going to end up with really rubbery beef. So what you do in order to make a real Chicago beef sandwich is you boil your au jus, turn it off, then you add your beef in there and kind of warm it up for a minute with the heat off. Then you add it to your sandwich. So that's the way to really do a Chicago style beef sandwich. Okay. All right, let's go to the back here. Drop you guys down. So you can see that it is a really dark mixture. Okay. It's syrupy, it's dark, it's going to be rich. And this is going to be the really nice like au jus that we're putting our corned beef into. Now the corned beef I just got from the deli. I got it sliced thin. I think this is like a Vienna brand corned beef. So you definitely can use your leftover corned beef or just go to the deli and grab whatever you need from there. Like I said, I often forget that I can do that. And sometimes I'm in the mood for like a really nice corned beef grilled cheese or a Reuben or something along those lines. And I just forget that I can do that at the grocery store. So let me get this mixed in here. We're just going to warm up this corned beef here and get it kind of covered in all of the delicious sauce that we just made. Now for the grilled cheese part, I am using a rye bread, a hearty rye bread. I like regular grilled cheese on rye bread, but this one specifically is going to be great on rye bread. And I'm also using a Swiss cheese. That's probably the best one to use. It is a little tangy, so it does kind of add a little bit to it. You can also use like a brown mustard or like a whole grain mustard if you want to when you're making this. So depending on your preferences. I'm making this for my daughter. She wants to bring this for lunch tomorrow to school. So she does not want the mustard on it. So I told her I would make sure I would not include the mustard on there. So we're just going to melt some butter in our pan here. Let me get my stovetop back on. Perfect. We're going to go ahead and get 2 slices of our rye bread. You could also do like a sourdough if you wanted to, okay, but I like the hearty seeded rye. And when I make this, I'm going to use Swiss cheese on both sides, okay? So that kind of acts as our glue for our grilled cheese here. So it's not only going to stick to the bread, but then it's going to have the meat in between the cheese, and we're going to end up with a delicious grilled cheese sandwich here, okay? I'm going to use about half of this corned beef and definitely picking up the onions along the way. And it's, like I said, just been sitting in this just warm au jus, and it's going to be so, so flavorful. All right, let me get a spatula here. While we're making our grilled cheese, I can go over just the last bit of history that I have for you here, which is going to be about fish and seafood and Irish cheese. So fish and seafood is definitely very popular in Ireland as well, because obviously Ireland is surrounded by the sea. It has rivers and lakes. So fish and seafood are really going to play a role in Irish food. Also popular is going to be oysters, crab, lobster, lobster prawn, mussels, whitefish, salmon. They're all easily found and enjoyed in Ireland. So a very, just a very resourceful country. Like I said, it gets knocked a lot for seeming like, I don't know, just kind of boring, but really they're just so resourceful and end up with some really just delicious, hearty, home-cooked kinds of meals, which sometimes I just feel like we just really need to take a lesson from them in that. All right, so I used about half the corned beef here with the onions, a little bit of the au jus inside of there. We're gonna put our other side on our sandwich and kind of give it a good little press. Let that butter work there as well. Irish cheese is also something that is pretty popular. But the early part of the 20th century, Irish cheese actually had a pretty poor reputation because the cheeses started coming from large scale manufacturers. All of that changed though in the 1970s when dairy farmers returned to artisan cheese making, and it revived a long lost art in Ireland. So today, Irish cheese is actually renowned throughout the world for the quality and distinctive flavor of its cheeses. It oftentimes has very rich flavors and is just so, so good. I know that when I was pregnant with my daughter, who's 13 now, I loved getting the extra, extra sharp Irish white cheddar cheese. And I would just eat that. Like I'd get home from, I taught at the time, I teach now. I'd come home from school and that would be my snack every day. Extra, extra sharp Irish white cheddar cheese. It just was like something I loved doing. And I still really enjoy that cheese as well. All right, something popped up in the chat here. Could you also make this in a panini press? Absolutely. Panini press, grill pan. You could do this in an air fryer if you want to. If you want to eliminate some of the butter and kind of the greasiness of the butter, what I like to do too is this might sound weird, but I promise you it makes a really good grilled cheese. It's how I actually make most of my grilled cheeses. You put mayo on the outside of your sandwiches, because really all you need to toast this bread is a really nice fat, okay? And the mayo is going to create a really nice golden crust on your bread without the extra greasiness. So that's another really great way to make grilled cheese as well. Also, I passed over one paragraph in my notes here. meat in Ireland. Now, the pig is the oldest domesticated animal in Ireland, and its presence is still widespread in food and cooking in Ireland. Sausages, bacon, all appearing in recipes, especially the Dublin caddle, which is considered to be one of Ireland's national dishes. And then, like I said, that's made from bacon, sausage, potatoes. It's basically a stew of leftovers, right? Irish beef is world renowned, and no St. Patrick's Day meal would be complete without their Gaelic steak, which is a pan-fried steak with a shot of Irish whiskey. So meat is definitely something very popular in Ireland too, especially with all their pastures and their farming traditions. So again, just a really rich culture of different, like I said, resourceful people. Another question. Why can't you butter the outside of your bread rather than put the butter in the pan? You absolutely can. I chose not to. I didn't want to have to melt the butter and then spread it on and use more things, more tools. So I just went ahead and just melted it in the pan, and I'm going to cook it that way. So there's definitely enough butter in the pan to get both sides nice and crunchy, crispy. But yeah, if you want to butter the bread before you put it in there, that's totally fine too. I just didn't have any softened butter or melted butter to be able to do that. So went right in the pan with it. Kind of a quick little chef's trick of the trade, as you might say. All right, we're getting nice and golden brown. Let me flip this. All right, you can see kind of the nice colorization there, which is actually the juices from the au jus that we made. So we're just going to go ahead and fry up both of those sides. And like I said, end up with a really, really yummy, fun grilled cheese, different kind of take on corned beef and cabbage. All right, guys, so that pretty much is kind of the wrap up of the program. The fact that we're finishing up this grilled cheese, our cake is in the oven. I will be posting pictures of that. If you want to follow me on social media as well, I do have a website called Making Mealtime Memories. I know we talked about that when the program first started. You can follow me there. I have a monthly newsletter that I put out. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. I put out a monthly newsletter there that you can subscribe to, and it includes recipes and all my upcoming classes. And then too, on social media, you can find me on Facebook, which is Classroom Kitchen. And I post not only my cooking class results and upcoming cooking classes, but today I just posted like a fun white chocolate lemon snack mix. We have Tip Tuesday, we have this or that Thursday, usually Fun Fact Friday. So lots of different fun social media things to come across as you are going through your week as well. So are there any last minute questions, comments, anything for tonight? Otherwise, you can find all of the pictures of all of our recipes on social media tonight. And I just really appreciate you guys having me and following me along for this journey in Irish cookery. So if there's any last minute questions, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. You're welcome, Carrie. Thanks for coming. You're welcome, Rosemary. My pleasure. You are welcome, Satana. You're welcome, Monica and Brian. Thanks for the comments, guys. My pleasure, Sandy.
All right. Well, it looks like we're getting a lot of thank yous and not a lot of questions. So that's a great time to wrap it up. Kristyn, wonderful job once again. Thank you so much for broadcasting from your home and teaching us some new things. So
my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Matt. I'll post some finished pictures here probably in the next 45 minutes when the cake is done.
Lovely. And again, you can see Kristyn's website, makingmealtimememories.com, in the chat. Thank you so much, Kristyn, and thank you at home. See you again. See you next time.